It was
The
this
people that we
awakening
need
of...
to educate, the people that we need to love into awareness.
Love them in the right direction.
Yeah, because there's nothing more effective than 19-year-olds educating the rest of the voting public while yelling, "Okay, boomer."
It all started with what seemed like an ordinary casting announcement. Disney named Rachel Zgler as the lead in their live-action Snow White, hoping to generate the usual fanfare these remakes attract. Instead, they kicked up a firestorm. This controversy wasn't just about a talented newcomer stepping into an iconic role. It became a swirling clash of social media outrage, political finger-pointing, and the so-called woke culture wars that left Disney scrambling to salvage a film mired in chaos before it even hit theaters. On the surface, it sounded simple. Cast a fresh face to revive a beloved classic.
What was this Academy Awards? Anyway, feminist Conor McGregor.
Who the fuck is that guy?
It's a weird walk for a weird broad, and I don't like her.
It is, and it's really mean to put her next to Gal Gadot, who's...
Yet the moment people heard who'd been chosen and how she felt about the original story, an uproar erupted across the internet. Suddenly, those nostalgic for the 1937 cartoon felt betrayed, while critics of old-school fairy tales declared a victory for modern ideals. The stage was set for conflict, though no one guessed just how volatile things would get. As leaks, rumors, and interviews piled on, it became clear. This wasn't just a movie. It was a battleground, and Rachel Zgler stood at the center. But how did a project designed for multi-generational magic morph into a cautionary tale of epic proportions? And why did so many viewers vow to boycott a film they'd ordinarily line up to see?
The original cartoon came out in 1937, and very evidently so. There's a big focus on her love story with a guy who literally stalks her. Yeah. Weird. Super weird. So we didn't do that this time.
Yeah. Some of you want us to hire actual dwarf humans, and then we thought we would have CGI magical creatures. How about this? We'll still offend the dwarves.
That's where our story begins. A deep dive into how a single casting choice, coupled with a star's outspoken attitude, triggered one of Disney's biggest cinematic disasters in recent memory. The Snow White remake was supposed to be a guaranteed blockbuster. Disney had struck gold with live-action remakes before, raking in billions by reimagining classics like The Lion King and Beauty and the Beast. Their formula was clear. Keep the iconic storyline, enhance it with cutting-edge visuals, and cast charming leads who played nice with the press. Easy, right?
163,000 rating, of which it got 1.6, not out of 5. Like, you know, sometimes you go to McDonald's, it's 1.6 out of 5.
Yeah.
1.6 out of 10.
Vinny, you know what that is?
How bad is that?
You took a test.
When executives unveiled Rachel Zgler as the new Snow White, initial buzz focused on her breakout performance in another Hollywood musical. She was recognized for her impressive vocal talents, important for a role that involved singing. However, the momentum shifted as people began comparing her to the famously pale princess from the original film. Online debates sprang up overnight. Some argued it was a positive step forward for inclusivity, while others insisted the character should mirror the 1937 portrayal exactly. A new wave of chatter emerged, fueled by Zegler's social media presence. Before she'd even slipped on Snow White's iconic dress, fans found older posts where she sounded dismissive towards certain Disney traditions.
For it.
That's her friend screaming.
Wow.
And it's bothered nobody was in there. Nobody
Can you go to the yeah, that's very so this is Bob Iger.
Which is not calculated by the hour. So she just encapsulates everything that most of us cannot stand about modern day feminism and the left in general, and Hollywood.
She joked about aspects of the princess narrative she found outdated, perhaps unaware that many fans view those elements as sacred. Soon, hashtags like #NotMySnowWhite cropped up, with critics labeling her remarks entitled or ignorant. Though it started off small, these were the first ripples of a much bigger storm. The real tipping point came from the star herself. It wasn't just the color of Snow White's hair or skin that fans obsessed over. It was Zegler's entire attitude. Rather than celebrating the opportunity to inhabit a legendary role, she came across in interviews as if she was above it. Every time a new quote circulated, more Disney loyalists felt uneasy.
Yeah, we had more dwarfs than we did viewers in most of these theaters. And as you know, there were no dwarfs other than some CGI weird generated version of them. It's the old, it truly is go woke, go broke, but also don't alienate half of the country when you're putting out a product.
To lie for a living. That's really what acting is, to pretend. They didn't earn it the same way, and so it comes with this entitlement.
The sense of wonder that typically surrounds these remakes faltered, replaced by creeping suspicion that the very essence of Snow White might be tossed aside. As Rachel Zgler's public statements picked up steam, so did the accusations of excessive wokeness. Online commentators, some with massive followings, clipped bits of her interviews and posted them to social media.
For every one of the 18 hours I am in the Snow White dress, I expect to get paid. If it's 18 hours, I want 18 hours of pay. I'm sure she got underpaid.
Disney's Bob Iger says their mission is to entertain, not send messaging as Snow White sales compete for worst performing live-action Disney adaptation ever. Go a little bit lower to see if there's any other quotes by him.
In one instance, she described the original film as lacking substance, especially focusing on how Snow White seemed to revolve entirely around finding love. In another, she joked that the classic prince was effectively a stalker, rolling her eyes at the cartoon's portrayal of romance. These statements hit longtime fans like a slap in the face. Many cherished the original for its simplicity and charm, seeing it as a snapshot of 1930s storytelling, a treasure that put Disney on the map. But Zegler was adamant.
Of problems. The movie went over budget, right? Went over about $250.
And so detached from reality. She's now bragging about the success of Snow White, which is a movie that's going to lose hundreds of millions of dollars, and mainly because of her, and because nobody wanted to support her.
They had the whole dwarf midget issue where they decided they weren't going to have any midget actors, right? They were having DEI-inspired magical creatures to replace.
Yeah. We're moving beyond those outdated fairy tales, she proclaimed in one interview, explaining that the new Snow White would highlight personal empowerment and leadership over dreamy, old-fashioned romance. Younger audiences might have nodded in agreement, but legions of devoted Disney watchers turned furious. For them, the magic was already beginning to fade. Suddenly, a debate erupted far beyond the film itself. Influencers on YouTube and other platforms labeled Zgler a symptom of the broader get woke, go broke trend.
Be a leader as a female and fall in love and be rescued by a prince, like that's incongruous bullshit. That's only the left's version of what it means to be a strong woman or female empowerment. On the set of West Side Story, where Steven Spielberg and co. were demanding that she prove how Latina she really is, since her name doesn't sound Latina, and she was angrily saying, did I have to bring in my little abuelita for you to believe that I was Latina?
According to them, modernizing a classic tale with heavy-handed messaging risked alienating the core Disney audience, families seeking nostalgia and comfort, not lectures. Her press appearances, peppered with eye rolls and sarcastic takes on the original, piled onto the notion that she was dismissive of tradition. Zgler didn't hold back either. She made further remarks about how audiences needed to get with the times. In her view, an updated Snow White empowered young girls, inspiring them to chase goals beyond romance. She even implied that it was creepy for older generations to cling to the naive fantasies of the 1930s.
People have real problems and no one gives a shit if she got paid for 17 instead of 18 on her multi-million-dollar salary.
Infusing messaging is not what we're up to, Iger said. We need to be entertaining. His comments were likely aimed at critics like Peltz.
Whether she intended it or not, her words created a massive rift. Rather than bridging generations, she was dividing them, stoking a controversy that overshadowed every new teaser and official update. If you're already stunned, hit that subscribe button. I dive into stories most people won't even whisper about, and there's a lot more to come. Then came the dwarfs debacle, launching the conversation into an entirely new dimension. Originally, Disney's plan was straightforward. Find a cast of dwarfs or small-stature actors to reprise the famous Seven.
That's her thanks to Steven Spielberg, who discovered her and made her. So she's an ingrate, she's annoying, and I think she's probably 2 and done.
Classic fans expected it. Longtime Disney watchers saw it as essential. But when actor Peter Dinklage went public, calling the concept itself outdated and offensive, Disney hit the panic button. Suddenly, the 7 dwarfs were replaced by CGI magical creatures. Executives insisted they were making the story more inclusive, acknowledging that the 1937 depiction might not sit well with today's cultural sensibilities.
You don't particularly see people who, look like me or are me playing roles like that. So it was definitely, when it got announced, it was a huge...
You mean your guess is as good as mine
ethnicity? It was trending on Twitter for days because all of the people were angry. And so it was like...
Our reproductive rights.
Ugh.
Come on.
Okay, Cheshire Cat.
Go vote blue. And if you disagree with this sentiment, just hit the unfollow button.
Wow, what a scene.
I don't need your business. Thanks.
Zegler, already entrenched in controversy, popped onto social media celebrating the change, implying it was the only choice that respected modern values. She portrayed herself as championing the shift, effectively saying, "This is how we evolve." Her cheerleading for the CGI replacements infuriated yet another group, little person actors. Many saw Snow White as one of the few major Hollywood productions that offered them substantial roles. Overnight, they realized those opportunities had vanished. One outraged actor posted on social media that they'd watched a golden chance slip away due to a single star's outspoken opinions and corporate fear at Disney.
Her heroine cannot be in love or be saved by a man, the prince, that she's more focused on becoming the leader she was meant to be, as if women in modern day America must make that choice.
It's no longer 1937, and we absolutely wrote a Snow White that is
not going to be saved by the prince.
She's not going to be saved by the prince, and she's not going to be dreaming
So
about
she's gonna die.
true love. She's dreaming about becoming the leader she knows she can be.
Our rights are on the line, folks.
Others chimed in, pointing fingers at Zegler for pushing an agenda that ended up costing them gigs. A swirl of resentment surrounded the film, from fans upset about the dwarfs' removal, to actors lamenting lost roles, to critics who found the new magical creatures laughably bad in leaked images. The dwarfs had become a flashpoint in a broader battle about representation, creative liberty, and fear of offending certain groups.
And if she hadn't have opened her mouth, I think that this movie might have done well. They might have just been able to ride on the hopium of the movie and some well-cut trailers, and people would have paid to go see it, and then it would have fallen off when people knew it was garbage.
Instead of simply updating the roles and preserving beloved elements, Disney seemed to have overcorrected, pleasing no one in the process. As if the film itself weren't already embroiled in enough drama, Rachel Zgler poured more fuel on the fire with a flurry of politically charged social media posts. In a series of messages, some snarky, others downright harsh, she openly ridiculed a specific portion of the voting population. Critics swiftly labeled her stance divisive and entitled, arguing that an A-list star headlining a Disney movie should keep personal politics toned down. Her critics on social platforms like X, formerly Twitter, ramped up calls to boycott. It wasn't just about defending the old Snow White anymore. It was about punishing a star who seemed to be wagging her finger at millions of potential viewers. For many, Disney movies are family-friendly territory, a safe space from the noise of politics.
So, this woman has clicked every box. And just for cherry on top at the end, she gave an interview last week talking about how they were basically a bunch of white supremacists.
Seeing Zegler hurl insults shattered that illusion, provoking an even wider audience that might otherwise have stayed neutral. The pushback was swift and brutal. Conservative commentators dissected her every statement, labeling her unhinged and rude. People who didn't even care about the movie's storyline began pledging never to buy a ticket. Even viewers with no strong political leanings started to wonder if supporting the film was worth stepping into such a storm of negativity. Disney's PR team scrambled to contain the situation.
There'll be 25,000 more just like her knocking on the same doors that she had opened to her. She had the opportunity of a lifetime, and instead of being humble and grateful, she was entitled and a snot.
Reports claimed that executives ordered Zegler to tone down her social media presence, but the damage was done. The tabloids had their feast. Snow White star takes aim at millions of voters, read one sensational headline. The avalanche of bad publicity overshadowed all attempts to refocus attention on the film's visuals, music, or any potential improvements to the classic story. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, the production itself was turning into a money pit. Word leaked out about mishaps on set, a rumored fire that caused extensive damage, expensive safety measures that stalled filming for weeks, and complicated reshoots as creative leads tried to incorporate new direction. Budget estimates ballooned from an initial $170 million to well over $200 million.
And I will look forward to her not getting cast in any more movies for a long time until she actually does learn something about humanity and humility.
Investors began to worry, quietly asking if they'd ever see a return on such a bloated gamble. Disney's marketing machine usually keeps a tight lid on trouble. This time, the cracks showed. Each PR statement emphasizing commitment to a magical reimagining was undercut by internet chatter about on-set chaos. Even the press seemed skeptical, as reporters asked pointed questions about how the film would address the controversies swirling around it, particularly Zegler's repeated remarks. There was also a rumor that certain sequences had to be cut or reworked drastically, given the meltdown over dwarf representation. Animators scrambled to update CGI magical creatures, which fans had derided as looking like half-baked placeholders.
Do you know, how hard it is to find an attractive young woman in Hollywood who can act and sin? It's not hard. Who just isn't going to offend half the country?
The longer the film stayed in production limbo, the more time critics had to poke holes in every decision. By the time the new release date was announced, postponed by nearly a year, both casual fans and die-hard Disney lovers had grown wary. Zgler herself didn't help matters, continuing to give interviews that only heightened public skepticism. She spoke about how the film was going to reinvent everything people think they know, sounding more like a rebellious activist than a star entrusted with a beloved property. Each quote ricocheted around social media, amplifying calls to boycott.
These people, and this is the difference between a business owner or someone who does very well for themselves in the private sector to become wealthy. This person was born looking a certain way and has a God-given ability.
At this point, it wasn't even about whether the film could be good. It was about whether it could dig itself out of the negativity hole it had fallen into. In a few short months, the Snow White remake morphed from a surefire Disney hit into a box office cautionary tale. Rachel Zgler, once seen as a gifted up-and-comer, became infamous for her polarizing remarks, political jabs, and dismissive attitude toward the role that should have been her crowning achievement. The Dwarf saga alienated fans who treasured the original's charm, and the barrage of social media outrage turned off countless families who ordinarily flocked to Disney productions. Now, the film stands as a stark reminder: no matter how big the brand, how iconic the property, or how massive the budget, no project is immune to controversy. Disrespect the core fan base, misjudge your star's public image, and push divisive messaging too hard, and you might sink a project with potential to earn hundreds of millions.
But we'll CGI dwarfs. So we'll guarantee no employment for little people while getting rid of this other component that warranted CGI. It was the worst decision they could possibly make.
In trying to modernize Snow White, Disney faced a revolt of fans who felt their cherished classic was being sneered at rather than honored. Where does Disney go from here? Will they revert to faithful retellings, focusing on what made these stories magical in the first place? Or double down, convinced there's still a market for radical reboots? One thing's certain, the meltdown of Snow White rattled everyone from everyday moviegoers to top Hollywood producers. The fiasco left scars on Disney's pristine image and overshadowed the career of a star who might have soared if she'd approached the role more gracefully.
You know what? Maybe Disney does. Maybe you're a tool, you're a pawn in this film. You didn't write it, you didn't direct it, you have nothing to do with the creation of Snow White.
Right.
You should shut up and do the job. This is the issue.
But Rachel Zgler made it so hateable that you really sabotaged and took hundreds of millions of dollars from the studio. I don't know how anyone would ever want to go into business with her ever again.
I mean,
as for audiences, they're left grappling with what it all means for the future of beloved fairy tales. Perhaps the real lesson is that timeless stories don't need to be forced into modern molds. Nostalgia is powerful, and fans have a deep emotional attachment to the magic they grew up with. Tinker with that too much, or worse, mock it, and you risk losing more than just box office revenue. You risk forfeiting the trust that turned Disney's earliest hits into classics in the first place. In the end, Disney tried to revive a fairy tale, but instead unleashed a real-world drama full of cast feuds, political uproars, and outraged fans. It's not a happily ever after, but it's definitely one for the history books. Whether Rachel Zgler and Disney can bounce back remains uncertain. What's crystal clear is that the live-action Snow White fiasco became more than just another box office dud. It stands as a wake-up call to a changing audience, a reeling entertainment industry, and a star who learned the hard way that the public's goodwill is as fragile as a magic mirror.